With Ryan Murphy's latest monster series being focused on killer Ed Gein, it got me looking through all of the previous versions and films that were based on the killer and grave robber that haunted Plainfield in the 1950s. One movie that's considered to be the strongest telling of the events, even though it's fictionalized, is the movie that was released over 50 years ago in 1974, which was titled Deranged. Whilst this movie isn't a like-for-like telling of the actual events that happened, it's so clear to see the inspiration that Ed Gein's actions had on it. So with that, I wanted to put this new series up against the movie, compare the similarities and differences, and answer which one was better. Here is Monster, the Ed Gein Story versus the 1974 Ed Gein movie. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The similarities. When it came to the 1974 movie, there were a fair few similarities to the 2025 TV series and the true story. For example, Ed Gein, who was called Ezra Cobb in this telling of events, was seen to be heavily influenced by his mother Amanda and had the religious views that she'd pushed upon him, ultimately leading him to view women to cause the sin of man, which is exactly what happened in the true story of Ed Gein and in the Netflix show. We also saw that she had a stroke, and it was the death of his mother that caused him to spiral and then become fixated in wanting to bring her back from the dead. It was also showed to us that Ez was viewed as an eccentric individual by the rest of the community, and that even though he seemed strange, there wasn't anything that they were initially truly worried about. They just thought he was a bit odd. The grave robbing was something that was also made apparent in this movie, which showed a direct link to Ed Gein being the main source of inspiration. Also, pair that with the attire that he was wearing with the checkered shirt and cap, it was obvious. Within this movie, Ez was seen to kill 3 women. One was Maureen Selby, who was an older lady that didn't relate to anything from the show or from the real-life story. But the one similarity that was there was that she was killed by a pistol, and that was how it was noted that he killed Mary Hogan in the true events. She was Ed Gein's first victim. Then he went on to kill a tavern worker called Mary, who one would have to imagine is based on the real-life Mary Hogan as she worked in a tavern. And then Ez went on to kill a hardware store worker called Sally, after lingering around outside the front of the store and claiming to buy antifreeze. This is the profession that the final victim of Ed Gein, Bernice Worden, had, and her being shot inside of the store with a rifle was how her death actually unfolded, just like Sally. However, unlike in the 1970s movie with what happened with Sally and with her also being considerably younger than Bernice Worden, Bernice wasn't chased through the woods or caught in a bear trap like we saw in the film, but the behaviour of Ez outside the store and him being the last person there was something that was also true in the real story, as it did ultimately lead to Ed's arrest. When it came to what he did to Sally by hanging her up inside of his shed, he did it in the same way that Bernice Borden's body was actually found by the police, except Sally still had her head. There were also pieces of furniture that were made out of pieces of skin, bowls that were made out of skulls, and Ez being inspired by many of the same mediums as what Ed Gein was inspired by. So the similarities between the movie and the true events was clear to see. The differences. When it came to the differences, there wasn't any focus on Ezra Cobb having a brother called Henry that was potentially killed by him. It also didn't delve into the babysitter that was killed or the 2 men in the woods that the real-life Ed Gein was suspected of killing, but was also shown to kill in the Netflix show. There also wasn't a focus of his inspiration being the likes of Ezra Cobb, and there also wasn't a shift in time where it showed Hitchcock working on Psycho. It was purely focused on a linear passage of time and moving as one. One of the main differences, and something that I thought was handled really well, was the schizophrenia and deteriorating mental state that Ezra Cobb had. We saw that he was still speaking with his mother even though she died, and he was having visions of her and listening to her teachings. However, unlike the Netflix show where it would drift off and get a bit confusing, within this the camera would simply pan around and we'd hear Ez speaking words that he believed his mother would be saying to him. I thought it was a bit more digestible, it made him seem even crazier, and it made a lot more sense. Another major difference was the tone in the voice that Ezra had when compared to Ed in the Netflix series. Don't get me wrong, they had the same accents, that was clear to hear. But with the Netflix show, Charlie Hunnam gave Ed a really high-pitched voice, which didn't quite work in my opinion. But in the movie, Roberts Blossom gave him one that was lower in tone, but still got across the creepiness in the way that he sounded. It sounded more similar to the tapes of Ed Gein that were released to the public. One major difference in the approach of these stories is the fact that the movie consisted of diegetic narration, where the narrator Tom Sims would appear inside of scenes alongside Ezra, almost as if he was looking back on what had happened before it unfolded and telling us. I thought it was quite an interesting approach for the movie to have, and it worked. I feel like it worked because of the shortness of the runtime that the movie had, as it was only around an hour and 20 minutes long, so it provided a bit more of a backstory to the events that had happened and the mindset that Ez was in. We didn't really need that in the Netflix show because it had 8 episodes, so there was plenty of time to gain more of an understanding. As this was a movie that was based on the killer, there were some major differences in the motives of Ezra Cobb. Ezra didn't only kill because he wanted to bring his mother back. He almost killed as well because he wanted to break away from his mother's hold and he wanted to be intimate with women. However, when he'd get flashbacks to his mother saying to him that they caused death, and it was what ultimately spurred him on to kill them. This is something that was kind of present in the Netflix series with the romantic relationship that Ed went on to have with Bernice. However, within real life, that wasn't the case in the slightest. There were no romantics involved at all. He only killed people that reminded him of his mother, so there was a large difference there. The likes of Maureen Selby, she was somebody that wasn't based on the true story, and Mary being younger and being taken to a dinner that was sat around a table that had bodies all around it didn't happen either. With her also being bludgeoned by an object that was made out of a bone, that was purely fictitious too. My review of the 1974 movie. When it comes to the 1974 movie Deranged, do you know what? I don't actually think it's that bad. It's far from the truth when it comes to telling the real-life story of Ed Gein, but it doesn't promise to tell the exact story when you go into it. It says how it's loosely based on the true events, but the stark similarities are just so clear to see. Where I think this movie shines is in the performance that Roberts Blossom gives as Ezra Cobb. He plays a deranged individual that's just so haunting to watch. The idea of being in the same room of him is utterly frightening, and we saw that most with the likes of Mary. The gaunt look that he had, the lack of any true feelings or emotions behind his eyes, and the short answers to all of the questions that he was asked is something that really did get me. The obsession that he had too when he was involved in rebuilding his mother, it was just frightening. The sheer gore that was in this movie as well is something that was front and center. Whether it be seeing the body in the coffin, the taking off of the hair so he could put it on his mother, or even his mother's death. The feeding her and the blood that then came splattering out was just purely disgusting. They didn't hold back, and even though the blood didn't look super realistic and it just looked like red paint because the movie is quite old, it still got across the feeling of being uncomfortable. The set design was actually something that I also thought was great. Pair that with the organ theme that would be playing throughout most of the movie, especially when inside of Ezra Cobb's house, and it did truly feel like a place that you didn't want to be. When Cobb was dressed as a woman amongst all of the dead bodies, that was probably one of the most frightening moments in the film. That, and also when Cobb was pulling on the chain on the trap which had Sally in it. He just looked so excited to have found her and to be at the point of taking her back. That smile, honestly, it sent shivers through my body. When Mary also wasn't able to escape, I was devastated for her because she was so close to getting that freedom. What I also quite liked about this movie was that Ezra Cobb, who was representing Ed Gein, was made out to be a madman in this. It wasn't like the Netflix series where it was only revealed later on that he was a bit deluded. Not at any point in the movie did they try to make us feel sorry for him. They actually showed us the monster that he was and that there was basically no saving him. When it comes to which is better out of the movie and the Netflix series, it's difficult to compare because they are very different. They're also 50 years apart from each other, so it feels wrong pitting them up against each other. What I will say though is that the Monster series is probably more enjoyable to watch, but it has the fictitious elements that the movie has, despite not claiming to be fictitious. But what I will say is that the movie is a lot more creepy, and it gets across the fact that Gein was a madman. I'd honestly recommend giving the movie a watch if you enjoyed the Netflix show, because even though it's different, you'll see the similarities and you'll be able to see how Ezra Cobb was inspired by Ed Gein. So, there you have it, Monster the Ed Gein Story versus the 1974 Ed Gein movie.